I'm Emily, a 35-year-old homemaker. Just the other day, I gave birth to twins, John and Sarah. It took 2 days from the start of contractions until they were born. I was completely exhausted, but when I heard their healthy first cries, all my tiredness disappeared. Originally, I was supposed to go home after giving birth, but a month before, my mom was hospitalized for surgery. My parents were excited to have me and the babies come home. My mom even said it was okay to bring the twins over, even though she was recovering. However, we decided to prioritize her health, so my husband and I chose not to move back in with them and instead tried to manage on our own. But instead of the joyful time I expected raising our children, something unexpected happened. What I'm about to share is the story of the intense harassment I faced during that time. On the third morning after I gave birth and returned to my apartment, the doorbell suddenly rang loudly. I wondered who could be visiting so early. When I looked through the peephole, I saw it was my mother-in-law. I quickly unlocked the door, and she barged in, making a lot of noise. The noise woke up both John and Sarah, who had just fallen asleep after a night of crying. My mother-in-law had taken a taxi to get to our place, and I couldn't just send her away. So I went to the kitchen to prepare some tea and snacks for her. As I did, she started criticizing the state of our home, saying, "Oh my, what a mess. I can't believe my son is living like this. Emily, you're not slacking off on your chores just because you had a baby, right?" She acted like the stereotypical annoying mother-in-law you see on TV, even running her finger along the windowsills to check for dust. I apologized, explaining that I hardly slept because the babies cried so much the night before. I promised to clean up once they calmed down, but as I was trying to soothe the crying twins, she swatted my hand away, took the babies, and said, "I'll take care of the twins. A sleepless night is no excuse to slack off. Start your house chores now." Even though I was exhausted, my mother-in-law insisted that I start doing housework right away. No matter how much I tried to explain, she wouldn't listen and focused only on the twins. I reluctantly made some formula milk for the babies, but she criticized me, saying, "What? You're feeding them formula. Any good mother would breastfeed. What kind of unloving parent are you?" Her words shocked me. I was already self-conscious about not breastfeeding, and hearing her say that almost made me cry. But I held back my tears and started cleaning the room as she demanded. Although she said she would take care of the babies, she only half-heartedly soothed them. When it came time to change their diapers, she called me over, even though I was in the middle of doing chores. I couldn't get anything done and didn't understand why she was even there. For the next 2 months, she came over almost every day, continuing to criticize me and only barely helping with the babies. This time was nothing but painful for me because she kept complaining about everything I did. I wanted to talk to my husband about it, but he was always so tired after work that I never found the right moment. After 2 months of enduring her snide comments, she suddenly announced that she wouldn't be coming over anymore. I thought I was finally free, but then she held out her hand and demanded payment for 2 months' worth of transportation expenses and for helping with childcare. I couldn't believe it. She was asking me to pay her for something I never asked for. I snapped at her and said, "What are you talking about? I never asked for your help. If I had, it would be different, but I didn't. Your presence over the past 2 months has been nothing but unpleasant. Please don't come here anymore." I immediately kicked her out of the house, packed up my things, and took my twins back to my childhood home. I felt guilty about burdening my mom, but I couldn't find peace staying there any longer. However, my mother-in-law went and told everything to my father-in-law and husband. My mother-in-law painted herself as the victim, saying that despite all her efforts to help, I had spoken harshly to her. When my husband came home and found us missing, he was shocked. After hearing the whole situation from me, he turned pale and stormed off to his parents' house. The next day, my father-in-law, who had only heard my mother-in-law's side of the story, turned pale when my husband told him what really happened. "Oh no, what have you done?" He suddenly scolded my mother-in-law, his face full of anger. Normally, my father-in-law is a calm man who rarely gets angry, so even my husband was surprised to see him so mad. My mother-in-law was flustered and confused. "Why are you so mad? Isn't she the one at fault? I went out of my way to help with the childcare, even paying for travel expenses. Why am I getting scolded?" My father-in-law, still furious, responded, "You don't understand anything. Do you know who her grandfather is?" My mother-in-law remembered my grandfather as the strict, serious man who had attended our wedding, but she didn't understand why it mattered. My father-in-law then revealed, "That man is the chairman of my company." Upon hearing this, my mother-in-law was shocked. My grandfather is indeed the chairman of a major corporation, and our wedding was a large event with many important people in attendance. While my grandfather is strict, he dotes on me, his granddaughter. He has always treated me with kindness, buying me expensive gifts and taking me to fancy restaurants. When I got married, he was so happy that he even cried, which surprised everyone. Given how much my grandfather cares for me, he would definitely not be happy if he found out how my mother-in-law had treated me. Normally, just knowing this would be enough to make someone think twice about crossing him. But there was another reason my father-in-law was worried. He was on the verge of getting a promotion to a managerial position, which would significantly increase his salary. This was a crucial time for him to stay in my grandfather's good graces, and my mother-in-law's behavior was jeopardizing that. My father-in-law, worried about his promotion, didn't seem to care about how I felt. He was more focused on his career than on his family. My husband, realizing his father's true intentions, was deeply disappointed. He said, "Enough is enough. I'm disappointed in my dad, who only thinks about himself, and shocked at my mom, who's been bullying my wife. Stay out of our lives." Hearing her son say this, my mother-in-law became frantic and tried to stop him. "Don't joke around. You're the heir to this family. I won't let you abandon us. I'm going to Emily's place to talk some sense into her. She's our daughter-in-law and needs to handle the household properly." But my father-in-law, worried about his promotion, stopped her. "You're not planning on barging into Emily's parents' house, are you? Don't do anything rash. I'll lose my chances of a promotion. Don't interfere." My husband left his family home without saying a word and walked to my parents' house. When he arrived, he explained everything that had happened and apologized. His face looked more sad than angry. "I can't believe my own parents are like this. I'm just sorry." In response, my parents didn't say a word but instead offered him dinner. "Come on, let's eat since you're here," I said. "James, you can stay the night if you like. Our house is close to your apartment, so you can just bring a change of clothes." At first, my husband was hesitant, touched by my parents' kindness. But after a long time of stress, he wanted to relax with the twins and decided to stay. It had been a while since we had a peaceful time together as a family. Watching my husband cuddle our crying twins was quite endearing. When it came time to sleep, the twins were sandwiched between me and my husband. I wish we could always have such peaceful moments, but deep down, I knew my mother-in-law wouldn't stay silent. I feared she might show up suddenly, but I never imagined how quickly she would strike. The next day, while my parents were at work, the doorbell at my parents' house rang incessantly. I had a bad feeling about it. When I checked the intercom, to my surprise, my mother-in-law had shown up unannounced. "Open the door, I know you're in there. Give me back my grandchildren," she yelled while banging on the door. The twins were crying so much that I was almost going crazy. Then, someone opened the front door for me. "Finally, you opened the door. Now quickly hand over the twins to—" "Wait, who are you?" The person who opened the door instead of me was my grandfather. "Who do you think you are, banging on someone's door like this?" "How rude," he said sternly. Whether my grandfather was angry or not, he spoke with a stern voice to my mother-in-law. As expected, she looked dumbfounded and couldn't say anything in response. "Wait a minute, you can't be the chairman my husband mentioned, can you?" My mother-in-law stammered, her voice shaking. "Huh? Oh, now I remember. Are you James' mother-in-law? I didn't recognize you because you didn't introduce yourself at the wedding," my grandfather replied. My mother-in-law had been entirely against our marriage, feeling like she was losing the son she had raised so carefully. She had adamantly refused to attend the wedding, but people around her managed to persuade her to show up. However, she never greeted my relatives and just sat in the waiting room with a sullen expression. No wonder my grandpa didn't recognize her. When he realized she was my mother-in-law, my grandfather's face turned even more intimidating and he stared at her, who was now trembling. I had previously told him everything I had been through, so he probably expected her to burst into the house, which is why he had been staying with us for a while. Well, the real reason was that he wanted to see his great-grandchildren, but he hadn't expected such an early confrontation. I didn't come here to bother you, Emily. I just came to see the twins because you brought them here without telling me. It's cruel not to tell me, isn't it?" My mother-in-law insisted, trying to justify her actions. However, I couldn't believe the words of a woman who had been banging on the door and pressing the intercom repeatedly, demanding her grandchildren back. "Is that so? But didn't you just tell your granddaughter to return my grandchildren? Since when did they become your possession?" My grandfather countered, his voice cold. Even my mother-in-law couldn't ignore these words and argued back. "What are you talking about? Those kids are the grandchildren of our family, especially John, who is the heir. They are rightfully our grandchildren, not yours," she retorted. The only reason she doted on the twins was because John was the heir. She loved Sarah too, but John, being the heir, was her favorite. "I see. I understand your affection for the twins, but is it right to neglect their mother, who was exhausted after childbirth? You forced your way into her home, which is quite a terrible thing to do, isn't it? My grandfather's words made my mother-in-law turn pale again. Wait, you're not going to tell my husband about this, are you? He specifically told me not to come here. I can't let him find out, she pleaded. Despite her husband strongly advising her not to come, she had come on her own will. If he found out, she might even receive divorce papers. Though she begged my grandfather to keep her visit a secret, there was no way he could accommodate such a request. He said to the flustered mother-in-law, "What are you talking about? There's no need to hide anything, especially if there's something to feel guilty about. I'll let your husband know that you came to visit us. Now, be sure to make an appointment next time you come, okay?" Leaving these words behind, he closed the front door. Normally, my mother-in-law would have knocked on the door and pressed the intercom many times, but knowing that the chairman was at home, she quietly left this time. She didn't mention anything about her abrupt visit to my family's home, but my grandfather later summoned her husband to his office and explained what had happened. Despite having been emphatically told not to go to our home, my father-in-law was visibly angry that his wife had done so anyway. "I deeply apologize for my wife's thoughtless actions. I'll make sure she never does anything like this again," he said, sincerely apologizing to my grandfather. However, my grandfather wasn't naive and saw through my father-in-law's true motives. "True, what your wife did is inexcusable, but don't you share some of the blame? You seem to only think about immediate concerns and don't pay much attention to those around you. There's a lot of dissatisfaction with you at the workplace. I can't possibly promote someone like that." In the end, my father-in-law's promotion was taken off the table. Thinking that he couldn't get promoted because of his wife, my father-in-law went home, gave her an earful, and slammed a completed divorce paper on the table before packing his bags and leaving. Until now, my mother-in-law had lived solely on my father-in-law's salary, so if he abandoned her, she wouldn't be able to sustain herself in the future. She tried to persuade him, but it was too late. The damage had been done and was beyond repair. Blaming me for everything, she became enraged and stormed my parents' home, banging on the door and shouting at the top of her voice, "I've lost everything because of you. If only you weren't here. Give me back my son, give me back my life." Her screams echoed through the house, and I felt a mixture of fear and sadness. The situation had spiraled out of control, and now, more than ever, I realized how deeply she resented me. But I knew that nothing would change her mind, and her bitterness had consumed her entirely. Late at night, past 9 p.m., my mother-in-law was banging on our door and shouting, "Give me back my grandchildren, give me back James." It was crazy for her to be yelling like that at such a late hour. We couldn't take it anymore, so my husband called the police. The police came and took her to the station. Even though it was a difficult situation, my husband kept apologizing to my parents and grandfather for the trouble, but they knew it wasn't his fault. Once things calmed down, our home felt peaceful again. It was a relief to finally have some quiet, and I hoped that no one would disturb us anymore. It was sad that everything had turned out this way, but I felt relieved knowing that we could now focus on raising our kids in peace. After that, my in-laws got divorced. My mother-in-law moved back to her parents' home, which was in a remote, rural area, much like Nebraska, where only a few buses run each day. Without a driver's license, it was hard for her to travel. She had wanted so badly to be with her grandchildren, but now she was having a tough time not seeing them. She kept begging my husband to let her see the grandchildren and to make up with me, but my husband couldn't forgive her for being so selfish, so he blocked her calls. Cut off from her son and unable to see her grandchildren, my mother-in-law became very sad and withdrawn. She stayed in her room, crying every day, feeling deep regret for everything that had happened.